Hey, this is Mr. York. This is the last video in this series on understanding your computer, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a better idea of what to look for also when you're going to compare computers to each other, or even when you're going to go purchase a computer, you should understand what parts to look at to compare one to another. So our last measurement that we haven't talked about yet is what we're going to talk about today, and there we go. When understanding your computer, there are three things that we've talked about that you need to look at. One, of course, being your hard drive, long-term storage. We said that you're probably going to want at least 500 gigabytes. If you're doing an SSD, it may be only possible to get 256 depending on the deal that you're looking at. And that's fine too, because you can always buy extra hard drive space. External hard drives are relatively inexpensive. Or we talked about other types of storage such as CDs, DVDs, and USB drives that can also help out with whatever your needs are. Number two is RAM. We said this is your working memory. It's the most volatile. As soon as you shut off your computer, it's gone. But while you're working on your computer or you're in any type of program, this is where it's going to be hanging out, which is why you want as much as possible. On your laptop, it's probably going to be closer to 16 gigabytes at the most. On your desktop, you could have as much as 64 or 128 gigabytes, and that'll help you process and do high-res graphics, play video games, edit video, and do Photoshop and other kinds of interesting things that require a lot of memory. And finally, the third thing that we haven't talked about yet is what makes all this work. Remember that without a hard drive, you just have a paperweight. It won't do anything. We don't have disk drives or optical drives that load things anymore. You could use a USB drive as a hard drive and load an operating system off of that, but your operating system's on the hard drive, so in order for your computer to boot up and to be ready to use, kind of necessary to have a hard drive or something that acts like one. If you don't have RAM, you can't actually do anything, and I don't know if your computer will even boot up without RAM the way that they work today. You would have to, anytime you try to move something, your RAM is the one that's holding on to it while you're working on it. It's almost like trying to work without hands. So you're going to need to have RAM, and again, without one or two of these things, you've got a paperweight. Without the third thing, you really don't have a computer at all, and you just have a hard drive and RAM sitting there doing nothing. And that's your processor. Because without your computer's brain or your central processing unit, you cannot perform any calculations. Inside the processor are two things, the arithmetic logic unit and the actual processor itself. And those two things work together to process information and crunch the numbers necessary to produce all the things that you see on your screen. To measure this part of a computer, we're going to use a different measurement. Before we were talking about everything being measured in terms of bytes, so when it comes to RAM, which is working memory, or storage, long-term memory, those are both measured in terms of bytes. But when it comes to processing speed, we need a different measurement because it's not appropriate. There are no bytes in your processor. This is literal thinking ability and speed. And so we have to use a term, an electronic term, called Hertz, Hz. And that is how fast electricity is traveling through this unit and enables it to think. Now, people are going to talk about clock speed and trying to compare one to another, and processor speed is gotten a little bit complicated, but it's easy to understand if you just think about hertz. Now, these numbers have changed over the years, but for the most part, this is still what's inside your computer and what you need to understand. So, in the very basic sense of it, we're still going to go back to our friends, the Greeks. And we need to remember that Greek measurement that we talked about before, and I said that these are just prefixes, and we can put these in front of anything. We can have a kilogram, we could have a kilometer, which we call a kilometer. We could have a kiloliter, which tells us about the volume of liquid, or a measurement of that. We could have a megaliter. Now I think we're talking about something very large, a large amount of liquid, almost like the oceans in the earth. Gigaliters, I don't know if we can measure anything that's that big. And of course, teraliters were not even there. Teragrams, those are all things these are all prefixes you can put in front of any of those terms to determine measurement. So we could also put them in terms of bytes, we said that earlier, and which means we can always also use these in terms of processor speed. So, when it comes to processor speed, that was a lot louder than I was expecting. Apparently I didn't turn off the sound on these, so this is going to be loud. Sorry about that. 1,000 hertz is going to equal 1 kilohertz. Brace yourselves. Ooh, I broke it. 1,000 kilohertz equals 1 megahertz. Oh, that was nice. Oh, that's fun. 1,000 megahertz equals 1 gigahertz, and I have no idea what's going on with this last one. Let's see. Still seems kind of loud, but that's 1,000 gigahertz equals 1 terahertz. Once you have these terms down, you can understand and compare one to the other. Now the problem is that we haven't been in the megahertz zone for 10 years at least, or maybe more. Right now, we've been in gigahertz since about 2002, 2003, somewhere around there, and if you had anything lower than that, you had a really slow processed computer. And what happens was we kept going up, and we got to about 3 gigahertz and stopped. And then we started dividing our processors and using different architecture. And the easiest way to compare clock speed now is in your computer. And there are several videos you can watch on that, and I actually linked one on my website as well. So if you want to understand more about how to compare computers, that's a totally different subject, but this is what's inside your computer, and it's easy to find out what yours looks like. It'll always be in terms of hertz, and in this case gigahertz. And almost every computer that you're working on, you should be able to compare using that terminology. So once again, let me go back 2 slides. Memory is measured in terms of bytes. Processor speed is measured in terms of hertz. Right now, and for the last several years, we've been in gigahertz, and it looks like we're going to stay there at the time being. If somebody tells you they have a terahertz processor, I'd really question that, because we're just not that fast. Instead, what we did is divided the architecture and had several different processors. So that is step 4, and with all that information that you have, you should now understand inside your computer what is a hard drive, what it does, what is RAM, what it does, how much you need, and also, of course, today, what is a processor and how that works to process information, and what measurements you should be using to judge one processor compared to another. Hope that helps you out. Thanks for listening, and that's it.